Ötzi, the world's oldest cold case. Forensic scientists found something in the Austrian Alps in 1991 that they initially assumed was routine, and then realized was going to change everything they thought they knew about ancient human history. On the 19th of September 1991, two German hikers, Helmut and Erika Simon, were walking along a high ridge in the Ötztal Alps, near the border between Austria and Italy, when they noticed something dark protruding from a melting glacier. They assumed it was debris, a piece of equipment perhaps, from a recent hiker who had met with misfortune on the mountain. It was not debris. When mountain rescue teams arrived, they found a human body, face down, partially encased in ice. The initial assumption, shared by local authorities and emergency responders, was that this was a recent accident. Hikers occasionally died in the Alps. The body would be recovered, identified, and a family notified. The recovery was handled without scientific care. Personnel used picks and a pneumatic drill to free the body from the ice, fracturing the left hip in the process, damage that would later complicate skeletal analysis. Equipment found near the body was not preserved with any urgency. Some items were damaged or lost before researchers arrived. When the body reached the laboratory of the University of Innsbruck, a forensic specialist examined the equipment and stopped entirely. The tools, the clothing, the items found alongside the body, none of it was modern, not even close. Carbon dating of samples returned a result the scientific team reportedly struggled to accept. The man had been frozen for more than 5,300 years. He had not recently fallen. He had been lying there since approximately 3,300 BCE, before the pyramids at Giza were built, before writing existed in most of the world, before the Bronze Age had arrived in Central Europe. The world's oldest cold case had just been opened. Researchers found, when they examined his possessions, that Ötzi was carrying the most advanced and valuable object known to exist in his era, and that its presence said something precise and important about who he was. He was named Ötzi after the Ötztal Valley where he was found, and the physical examination conducted over the years following his discovery built a detailed portrait. He was approximately 45 years old at the time of his death, middle-aged by modern standards, old by the standards of his era. He stood about 1.60 meters tall. He had suffered from arthritis, from intestinal parasites, from dental cavities. His nails showed growth interruption lines that indicated 3 separate periods of serious illness in the final months of his life. He was not a healthy man. His clothing was sophisticated in ways that surprised researchers. His coat was made from panels of goat hide, stitched together using sinew thread in a technique that required skill and preparation time. His hat was made from brown bear fur. His shoes had a complex layered construction, a grass lining for insulation, a leather sole, and a woven upper that a modern shoe designer assessed, in a published study, as functionally excellent for the terrain and conditions he would have encountered. The copper axe found beside him is the detail that most precisely defines his status. The blade was cast from copper at a purity of 99.7%, meaning whoever made it had access to high-quality ore and the technical ability to process it. Copper was the most valuable material in Central Europe in 3,300 BCE. Copper axes were not everyday tools. They were markers of significant social standing. Whether Ötzi led a clan, managed livestock across seasonal mountain routes, or held a religious or political role, the axe established one thing clearly: he was not an ordinary man. Scientists found, when they completed the full genome sequencing of Ötzi in 2012, that they were not looking at the ancestor they had expected, and that living people connected to his bloodline were identifiable today. The full genome sequencing of a 5,000-year-old mummy was, at the time of its publication in the journal Nature Communications, a technical achievement at the frontier of what ancient DNA analysis could accomplish. The degraded genetic material required extensive reconstruction and verification before the team could publish with confidence. The results were specific and, in several cases, surprising. Ötzi had brown eyes, not the blue eyes that popular reconstructions had frequently depicted. His skin was darker than most modern Central Europeans. His hair was dark and worn long. He was lactose intolerant, a condition that was the norm for adult humans in the Neolithic period, before the genetic adaptation for adult lactase persistence spread through farming populations. His Y chromosome haplogroup placed his paternal ancestry in a lineage today most closely associated with populations on the island of Sardinia and in parts of the Iberian Peninsula. This was consistent with the broader picture of prehistoric European genetics. The people who lived in Central Europe 5,000 years ago were not the direct ancestors of modern Central Europeans in any simple sense. Major population movements, particularly the expansion of steppe peoples from the east, replaced or diluted those earlier lineages over the following millennia. But in Austria, researchers found something more immediate. 19 living men whose Y chromosome DNA showed a close enough match to Ötzi's to indicate a shared male line ancestor within a genealogically meaningful timeframe. 19 people, alive today, connected by a measurable thread of DNA to a man frozen on a mountain in 3,300 BCE. Researchers found 61 tattoos on Ötzi's preserved skin, and the locations of those tattoos suggested that the person who made them understood the human body in ways that formal medical science would not document for another 4,000 years. The tattoos were not decorative in the conventional sense. They were made by making small cuts in the skin and rubbing charcoal into the wounds, distinct from needle-based tattooing. The marks themselves were simple: parallel lines, small crosses, grouped dashes. None were placed where they would normally be visible to others, arguing against a status-marking function. What researchers noticed was their location. When the tattoo sites were mapped against the areas of Ötzi's skeleton where CT scanning identified arthritic degeneration, the correlation was striking. The tattoos clustered at the lumbar spine, the right knee, the right ankle, and the left calf, precisely the areas where his bones showed the most wear-related damage. The correspondence between the tattoo placements and the acupuncture treatment points documented in traditional Chinese medicine was so close that it was noted explicitly in the research publication. Traditional Chinese acupuncture was not formally documented until approximately 2,000 years after Ötzi's death. The implication, carefully stated by researchers, was that knowledge of specific body points associated with pain may have existed independently in European populations far earlier than any written source records. In his equipment, researchers also found 2 pieces of birch polypore fungus threaded onto leather cords. This fungus has documented antibiotic properties and has been shown effective against the specific intestinal parasite whose eggs were found in Ötzi's gut contents. Whether this was intentional pharmacological use is debated. The specificity of the match is difficult to dismiss. CT scanning found something that fundamentally changed the forensic reconstruction of Ötzi's last hours. His stomach was completely full, and its contents were identifiable in extraordinary detail. For years after the discovery, the contents of Ötzi's digestive system had been difficult to analyze because researchers had assumed his stomach was largely empty, based on its position in the body. In 2011, a CT scan revealed that the stomach had shifted upward over the millennia due to the mummification process, and that it was in fact full, containing a meal that had been consumed approximately 30 to 60 minutes before he died. For years after the discovery, the contents of Ötzi's digestive system had been difficult to analyze because researchers had assumed his stomach was largely empty based on its shifted position in the body. In 2011, a CT scan revealed the stomach was in fact completely full, containing a meal consumed approximately 30 to 60 minutes before he died. Laboratory analysis identified 4 distinct components. Ibex meat, from the wild mountain goat native to the Alps, had been dried before consumption. Red deer meat, also preserved. Einkorn wheat, one of the earliest cultivated grain varieties in European prehistory, and traces of slowberries and other plant material. A nutritionally deliberate and varied meal. The pollen found within the stomach contents was analyzed and identified as coming from plants that bloom in late spring or early summer, establishing the approximate season of his death with remarkable precision. The fullness of the stomach, combined with the absence of any evidence of physical exertion in the immediate pre-death period, told researchers something specific. Ötzi had not been running. He had stopped on the mountain, eaten a substantial meal, and rested. The forensic picture was of a man entirely at ease in his surroundings. He did not know what was coming. Scientists found the flint arrowhead 10 years after the discovery, and its presence transformed Ötzi from an archaeological curiosity into a forensic case that is, technically, still open. For the first decade after Ötzi's discovery, researchers had assumed he died from exposure, that the mountain cold had simply overtaken him during a winter crossing. The wound that changed that interpretation was identified in 2001, when a radiologist reviewing the X-ray images noticed something that had been overlooked. A triangular stone point, approximately 3 centimeters long, embedded in the left shoulder, positioned against the subclavian artery. The position of the arrowhead and its orientation indicated that it had been fired from behind and below at a significant angle, consistent with a shot taken by someone positioned lower on the slope, while Ötzi was above them. The arrowhead had severed a major blood vessel. The blood loss would have been rapid and incapacitating. Detailed blood analysis of his clothing and equipment identified the presence of human blood from 4 distinct individuals, none of them Ötzi himself. Blood from 2 different people was found on the blade of his stone knife. Blood from a 3rd person was found on one of his arrows. A 4th blood type was present on his coat. The interpretation published by the research team was that Ötzi had been in physical conflict, possibly multiple separate engagements, in the days immediately preceding his death. A deep cut across the palm of his right hand, consistent with gripping a blade during a struggle, showed healing tissue around the wound edges, indicating it had been sustained approximately 2 to 4 days before he died. He had been in a fight, he had injured others, and then, while resting and eating on the mountain, someone had come up behind him. Archaeologists found, when they examined the evidence for motive, that the question of why Ötzi was killed was almost as interesting as the question of who did it, and that the copper axe, sitting untouched beside his body, was one of the most important clues. The axe was not taken. This is the detail that investigators return to most consistently when discussing motive. In 3300 BCE, a copper axe of that purity and craftsmanship was the equivalent of a significant financial asset, something a thief or opportunistic attacker would not leave behind. The fact that it remained with the body indicates that robbery was not the primary motive for the attack. 3 main theories have been developed and debated in the published literature. The first is a dispute over resources or leadership. Ötzi's status, indicated by the axe and the quality of his equipment, suggests he was a person of consequence in his community. Competition for leadership, territory, or control of trade routes was a documented feature of Neolithic and Copper Age societies across Europe. Someone with reason to remove him from a position of power had both motive and the specific knowledge of where to find him on the mountain. The second is personal revenge. The blood on his weapons and the defensive wound on his hand indicated that Ötzi had been in conflict recently. Someone he had fought, or someone connected to a person he had injured or killed, may have followed him onto the mountain with the specific intention of settling that account. The arrowhead recovered from his shoulder was not from his own quiver. It was of a different flint type than his own arrows, sourced from a different geographic location. Whoever shot him had come prepared with their own equipment and had fired from a concealed position, at distance from behind. This was not a chance encounter. It was planned. Journalists found, when they began tracking the fates of people closely connected to the Ötzi discovery, a sequence of deaths that generated significant media coverage and a genuine statistical question about whether the pattern was meaningful. The so-called curse of Ötzi became a topic of international press coverage in the early 2000s, following a pattern of deaths among individuals who had been directly involved with the mummy's discovery and study. The first was Rainer Henn, the forensic pathologist who had handled Ötzi's body during the initial examination, who died in a car accident in 1992. The second was Kurt Fritz, the mountain guide who had led the team that transported the body from the recovery site, who was killed by an avalanche in 1993. The third was Rainer Herb, a journalist who had filmed the initial recovery, who developed a brain tumor and died in 1994. The fourth was Helmut Simon, one of the two hikers who had originally found the body, who became lost in the Alps in 2004 and was found dead several days later. The deaths continued to be catalogued by journalists through the early 2000s, reaching counts of 7 or more, depending on how loosely the connection to Ötzi was defined. Statisticians who examined the pattern noted that the people involved in the discovery constituted a large group: researchers, technicians, journalists, rescue personnel, and that several of the deaths occurred years or decades after the discovery, reducing the statistical significance of the clustering. The consensus in the scientific community was that the pattern did not exceed what would be expected by chance across a population of that size over that time period. The explanation was probability, not a 5,000-year-old curse. But the story persisted in exactly the way such stories do, because people found it more interesting than the statistics. Conservators found, when they calculated the precise environmental conditions needed to preserve a 5,000-year-old mummy indefinitely, that the requirements were extraordinarily specific, and that meeting them required technology that had not existed when Ötzi was discovered. Ötzi is currently housed in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, in a cold cell maintained at -6 degrees Celsius with 99% humidity, conditions replicating the glacier environment that preserved him for 5 millennia. The museum draws hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, making him one of the most visited archaeological exhibits in the world. The question of where Ötzi legally belonged was not straightforward. A precise survey in 1992 established that the discovery site was approximately 92 meters inside Italian territory, placing legal custody with Italy, which is why he is in Bolzano rather than Innsbruck, despite being found much closer to the Austrian side. 3D printing technology has produced a detailed physical replica, accurate to the millimeter, that travels to international exhibitions. A forensic facial reconstruction using CT scan data shows a heavily built man with dark skin and dark eyes, a face that consistently surprises people because it looks fully human in ways that abstract descriptions of ancient remains do not convey. The glacier that preserved him is receding. Climate data shows the Ötztal Alps losing ice cover measurably each decade. Ötzi's emergence in 1991 was itself a product of glacial retreat, and researchers have noted that further melting will likely expose additional remains and artifacts from the same period. His preservation was accidental, and the conditions that made it possible are disappearing. DNA analysis found, in its final accounting of what Ötzi's genome revealed, something that goes beyond the specifics of one man's ancestry and touches on the larger question of what the study of ancient individuals tells us about human nature across time. The 5,000-year-old cold case remains technically unsolved. The DNA on Ötzi's weapons identified 4 individuals whose blood he was carrying, but those individuals have no names, no located descendants, No connection to any living person that forensic genealogy has established. The identity of the person who fired the arrow is unknown and, in all probability, unknowable. What the case offers instead is a precisely documented instance of interpersonal conflict from the early Copper Age, complete with physical evidence of planning, execution, and the social dynamics that made it possible. The untouched copper axe, the defensive wound healing for 2 days before death, the arrowhead from a different source than his own. These details point toward a society managing the same pressures, resource competition, status conflict, personal grievance, that drive interpersonal conflict today. The DNA that connected Ötzi to 19 living men in Austria also connected the investigation to a broader truth about human continuity. 5,000 years is an enormous span. Civilizations rose and collapsed within it. Languages spoken when Ötzi walked the Alps left no surviving speakers or written record. And yet, his genome is partially present in people alive now. People who go to work, raise children, and live in the shadow of the same mountains where his body waited in the ice. He was named by strangers. His killer was never found. His genome outlasted everything he knew. That is what 5,000 years looks like, measured in DNA.